The house sat at the end of a quiet street where kids rode bicycles and neighbors waved from their lawns. It was not the biggest home in the area, but it had a wide backyard, and that was what mattered to the homeowner, Mark. He had bought the place 8 years ago because it felt peaceful. He liked the calm mornings, the clean air, and the way the sun reached the yard in the late afternoon. For years, Mark had imagined one thing in that backyard: a swimming pool. Every summer, the heat felt stronger. Mark would sit inside with a fan or drive to a crowded public pool. He wanted something better, something private. A pool in his own yard meant weekends with family, cold water on hot days, and a reason to stay home instead of searching for relief somewhere else. So Mark saved money. He cut extra spending, worked overtime, and planned carefully. When he finally signed the contract with a local pool company, he felt proud. It was not just a pool to him. It was proof that he could build a better life, one step at a time. On a bright morning, the crew arrived. A truck rolled into Mark's driveway, carrying digging tools, pipes, boards, and a small machine for heavy work. The crew leader, Ravi, stepped out first. He was calm and focused, the kind of person who measured twice before cutting once. Behind him came 2 workers, Sam and Lee, both wearing dusty boots and work gloves. Mark greeted them with a friendly smile. He showed them the backyard, the pool design, and where the shape would go. Ravi listened closely, nodded, and checked the ground markers. "It should be smooth work," Ravi said. "The soil looks normal." Mark liked hearing that. He stood near the back door with his coffee, watching as the workers set up. They measured the space again and placed bright paint lines on the grass to show the exact pool outline. Then the digging began. At first, it was loud but simple. Shovels cut through grass, and the top layer of soil came up dark and soft. The small machine scraped away chunks of earth. Mark felt excited each time the hole grew deeper. He could almost see the pool taking shape in his mind. Hours passed. The sun climbed. The workers sweated and wiped their brows. Mark went inside for a while, then returned outside to check progress. That was when the change happened. Sam was near the center of the marked area when his shovel hit something hard. The sound was different from a rock. It was sharp and solid. Sam tried again. The shovel hit the same thing. He stopped and looked down. "Ravi," Sam called. "We got something here." Ravi walked over and crouched beside him. He brushed away loose dirt with his glove. A flat surface appeared under the soil. It was smooth, not rough like stone. Ravi tapped it with the metal end of his tool. The sound was dull and hollow, like knocking on a door. Mark stepped closer, his coffee forgotten in his hand. "Is it a big rock?" he asked. Ravi shook his head slowly. "No. This looks like concrete." Mark frowned. He had never seen anything like that in his yard. The grass had always grown evenly. There had never been a bump, a dip, or a strange patch. Ravi signaled the workers to stop the machine. The backyard fell quiet, except for a distant lawnmower somewhere down the street. Ravi looked at Mark. "We need to dig carefully now," he said. "If this is a slab, it could be part of something old. We don't want to damage anything or cause a safety issue." Mark nodded, though his stomach tightened. He did not like the word safety issue. The crew switched to smaller tools. They scraped soil away slowly, clearing the surface one careful section at a time. More concrete appeared, spreading wider than Mark expected. It was not a small patch. It was large, like a big rectangle buried just under the ground. Lee brushed dirt from one corner and paused. "There's metal here," he said. Ravi moved closer. He cleared the spot. A metal ring was set into the concrete, like a handle. Mark felt his heartbeat pick up. "A handle?" he asked. Sam stared at it. "That looks like something you pull." Ravi's face stayed controlled, but his eyes looked more alert now. He ran his gloved hand over the concrete edge. The slab had clean lines, as if it had been placed carefully. The edges were sealed tight. No cracks. No signs of damage. It looked like someone had covered something up and wanted it to stay covered. Mark tried to think of reasonable answers. Maybe it was an old septic cover. Maybe it was a storm shelter. Maybe it was just construction debris left by the previous owners. But those ideas felt weak. The slab did not look like a random leftover piece. It looked planned. Ravi stood and dusted his gloves. "We should stop and report this," he said. "If it opens, it could be a cellar, a storage room, or something we need permission to access." Mark's mouth went dry. "Do we have to call someone?" he asked. "Yes," Ravi said. "It's the safe way. If we break it or open it without approval, it could become a problem for you." Mark agreed, but curiosity pulled at him like a rope. He had lived here for years. He had hosted dinners, planted flowers, and celebrated birthdays. All that time, something had been sitting under his feet. The workers kept clearing dirt around the slab so it could be seen fully. The rectangle stretched beyond the pool outline on one side. That surprised Ravi. It meant the slab was not made for the pool. It had been there long before the pool plan existed. As Lee cleaned a corner, he noticed faint marks. Letters. They were carved into the concrete, worn by time and soil, but still visible if a person leaned close. Mark bent down. His hands shook slightly as he wiped dirt away with his fingers. The letters became clearer. The words were simple. They did not explain what was underground. They only warned people not to open it. Mark's chest felt heavy. He looked up at Ravi, searching for comfort. Ravi stepped back and took a slow breath. "That settles it," he said. "We do not touch it. We wait for someone official." Mark nodded again, but his mind refused to calm down. If it was a shelter, why would it have a warning? If it was storage, why would it be sealed so tightly? And if it was nothing serious, why would someone go through the effort to hide it under fresh soil and grass? The sunlight felt different now, as if the backyard had changed. The same yard that once looked normal now felt like a secret place, a stage waiting for something to happen. Mark walked a few steps back, staring at the slab. He imagined the weight of all the years it had been buried. He imagined the person who placed it there. He imagined the reason they wanted it forgotten. This was not how the day was supposed to go. Mark had planned for a pool. He had planned for summer fun and peaceful evenings. Instead, he was standing over a hidden concrete door, carved with a warning, sealed like someone feared what lay below. And Mark could feel it clearly. The real story of his house was only beginning. The workers left their tools resting near the fence, and the backyard became quiet again. The hole in the ground looked strange now, like an open wound in the grass. At the center of it lay the concrete slab, wide and flat, with a metal ring resting in silence. Mark stood near the back steps, staring at it as if it might move on its own. Ravi made the call to the local building office. He explained what they had found and asked for guidance. The person on the other end listened carefully and said someone would come to inspect it later that day. Until then, the crew was not allowed to dig further. Mark thanked Ravi and the workers for being careful. They agreed to wait nearby and clean their equipment while they waited. No one wanted to leave the site completely, not with something like this uncovered. Time moved slowly. Mark went inside his house, but the comm rooms did not feel the same. He poured himself a glass of water, yet his hands still shook. His eyes kept drifting toward the back window, where the slab waited under the open sky. He tried to remember the day he bought the house. The inspection report had been clean. No mention of underground rooms or sealed structures. The previous owner had been an elderly man who spoke kindly and never mentioned anything unusual. Mark wondered if the man even knew. After nearly 2 hours, a dark-colored vehicle pulled up in front of the house. 2 people stepped out. One was a woman named Nina, an inspector from the building office. The other was Paul, a safety officer. Both carried clipboards and wore serious expressions. Mark walked outside to greet them. He explained everything again, from the digging to the warning carved into the slab. Nina listened closely and asked careful questions. Paul examined the ground from a distance before stepping closer. They walked around the hole and studied the concrete. "This is old," Nina said. "Older than this house." Paul tapped the slab lightly and listened. "It is hollow underneath," he said. "There is space below." Mark swallowed. "So it really opens?" "Yes," Nina replied. "But we need to be careful." She asked Ravi about the exact depth and width. Ravi answered clearly and showed where the pool lines were marked. Nina took notes and nodded. "The warning is concerning," Nina said. But warnings were often used in the past to keep people away from private storage or shelters. Mark asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "What kind of shelter?" Nina looked at him. "Storm shelter is possible. Storage for supplies is also possible." Some older homes had underground rooms built during times of fear or uncertainty. Paul examined the metal ring more closely. "This handle is strong. It was made to last. Whatever is under there was meant to be accessed, not sealed forever." That did not make Mark feel better. After a short discussion, Nina gave permission to open the slab under supervision. She said it was important to identify what was underneath before any construction continued. Ravi and Sam prepared carefully. They tied a strong rope to the metal ring. Paul stood nearby, ready to step in if anything seemed unsafe. Mark stood back, his heart beating fast. Ravi pulled slowly. The slab did not move at first. It felt heavy, as if the earth itself was holding it down. Then there was a soft sound, like air shifting. The slab lifted just enough to break the seal. A deep, cold breath of air rose from below. Mark stepped back, surprised by the smell. It was not foul, but it was old. Like dust and time had been trapped together for many years. Paul shined a flashlight into the opening. A ladder came into view. Metal rungs disappeared into darkness. "There is a room down there," Paul said. Nina leaned forward but kept a safe distance. "Do you see anything dangerous?" Paul shook his head. "Not yet. But we should go down carefully." Ravi looked at Mark. "Do you want to see this?" he asked. Mark hesitated. Every part of him felt torn. Fear told him to stay away. Curiosity pushed him forward. "I need to know," Mark said quietly. Paul secured the ladder and tested it for strength. It held firm. He went down first, step by step, his flashlight cutting through the dark. Mark watched from above, holding his breath. After a moment, Paul spoke from below. "It is solid down here. The room is stable." Nina followed carefully. Ravi stayed at the top, watching the edges of the slab. Mark waited until Nina called up to him. "You can come down if you want." Mark placed his foot on the first rung. The metal felt cold under his shoe. He climbed slowly, the light above fading with each step. When his feet touched the ground below, Mark looked around. The room was larger than he expected. The walls were concrete, thick and smooth. The ceiling was low but strong. A single light fixture hung from the ceiling, though it no longer worked. Along one wall were shelves. Wooden boxes sat neatly in rows. They were covered in dust but not damaged. Everything looked organized, as if someone had taken great care before leaving. Mark's eyes moved from one box to another. "This was not random," he said. Nina nodded. "No. This was planned." Paul opened one box slowly. Inside were old tools, carefully wrapped in cloth. Another box held glass jars filled with dried food, long past its time but still sealed. "This looks like a shelter," Paul said. "A place to wait out something." Mark walked slowly around the room. His footsteps echoed softly. He felt like he was walking through someone else's life, frozen in time. In the far corner, Mark noticed something different. A small metal door was set into the wall. It was smaller than the slab above, and it had a simple lock. Mark pointed. "What is that?" Paul moved closer and examined it. Another storage space, he guessed. Or a safe. Nina looked serious. If this is a safe, it could contain documents or valuables. We need to document it before opening. Mark's mind raced. His backyard had hidden a full underground room. And now, inside that room, was another sealed space. The warning on the slab above suddenly made sense. It was not meant to scare people away from an empty hole. It was meant to protect what was hidden deeper. As Mark stood in the quiet underground room, surrounded by boxes and sealed doors, he realized something important. The pool could wait. Because whatever story lay beneath his backyard was far more important than water and tiles. And they had only uncovered the first layer of it. The underground room felt colder as time passed, even though the air was still. Mark stood near the shelves, his eyes moving slowly from one box to another. Each box felt like a message from the past, left behind by someone who had planned every detail carefully. Nothing was broken. Nothing was rushed. Whoever built this place had wanted it to last. Nina took photos of the room and wrote notes on her clipboard. Paul checked the walls and ceiling, tapping lightly to listen for weak spots. Ravi watched from the ladder, ready to help if needed. Mark kept looking at the small metal door in the corner. It was simple, plain, and quiet. Yet it pulled his attention more than anything else in the room. The lock was old but clean, with no rust. It looked like it had been protected from moisture and time. "What if we leave it closed?" Mark asked. His voice echoed softly. Nina looked at him. "That is an option," she said. "But anything sealed like this should be inspected. It could contain documents that explain why this place exists." Mark nodded. He wanted answers. Not knowing felt worse than fear. Paul knelt in front of the door and examined the lock. "This is not a modern lock," he said. "But it is well made." He reached into his bag and pulled out tools designed for inspection work. He worked slowly, careful not to damage anything. The room stayed silent except for the soft sound of metal moving. After a moment, there was a small click. The lock released. Paul paused. He looked back at Mark and Nina. "I am opening it now," he said. The metal door swung open with a low sound. Inside was a narrow space, like a deep cabinet built into the wall. Mark leaned forward, his heart beating fast. The light from Paul's flashlight revealed stacks of folders and several sealed envelopes. They were placed neatly, one on top of the other. Everything was dry and clean. Nina stepped closer. "These look like records," she said. Paul took out one folder carefully and opened it. Inside were papers, yellowed with age but still readable. The writing was neat and clear. Mark watched their faces closely as they read. "These are names," Nina said slowly. "Lists of people." Mark felt a chill. What kind of people? Paul turned a page. Families. Addresses. Dates. Nina flipped through another folder. "This looks like records of supplies, schedules, and plans. This place was used for a long time." Mark tried to understand. "Used by who?" Nina looked thoughtful. "We cannot say yet. But this was not just one person. This was organized." Paul opened one of the sealed envelopes. Inside was a letter. He read silently at first, then spoke aloud. "This letter explains why this shelter was built," Paul said. Mark stepped closer. Every word felt heavy. Paul read carefully. The letter spoke about a time when people feared major disaster. It talked about preparing in secret, about keeping families safe, and about not drawing attention. The shelter was meant to protect people during uncertain times. It was built by a group, Paul said. Neighbors working together. They did not trust authorities, and they wanted privacy. Mark listened closely. The idea made sense. In the past, fear had pushed people to build hidden places. But why hide it from future owners? Mark asked. Nina answered. Fear does not disappear easily. They probably believed it was safer if no one knew. Mark walked slowly back into the center of the room. He imagined families climbing down the ladder long ago. He imagined quiet voices, shared food, and long hours waiting together underground. The shelter was not a place of danger. It was a place of hope. Paul continued to check the remaining folders. One contained maps of the neighborhood as it once was. Another listed names with notes beside them, marking who contributed supplies and labor. Then Paul paused. "There is something else," he said. He pulled out a small wooden box from the back of the cabinet. It was lighter than the others and sealed with simple tape. Paul opened it carefully. Inside were photographs. Mark picked one up with permission. The photo showed a group of people standing in front of an unfinished hole in the ground. They were smiling. Some held tools. Others held children. Mark's throat tightened. "These are the people who built this," he said. Nina nodded. "Yes." The photos continued. One showed shelves being installed. Another showed boxes being carried down the ladder. One showed a man carving letters into a concrete slab. The warning. Mark stared at that photo longer than the others. The man in the picture looked serious but calm. He was not trying to scare anyone. He was trying to protect what mattered. Mark felt a strange respect for him. As they finished reviewing the contents, Nina closed the cabinet door gently. "This is important," she said. "These documents are part of local history." Mark looked around the room again. The fear he had felt earlier had changed into something else. Understanding. "This place saved people," Mark said. "Yes," Paul replied. "And it did exactly what it was meant to do." Nina explained what would happen next. The documents would be copied and preserved. The shelter would be recorded in official records. Mark would be given options about what to do with it. "You are not required to remove it," Nina said. "In fact, many people choose to preserve places like this." Mark thought about the pool, the plans, the money, the dream of summer days. Then he thought about the people in the photographs. The choice felt clearer now. "I do not want to destroy it," Mark said. "This place has a story." Ravi smiled from the ladder. "That is a good choice," he said. As they prepared to leave the underground room, Mark took one last look around. The shelves, the boxes, the quiet air. This space had been hidden, not because it was dangerous, but because it was precious. And Mark knew one thing for certain. The discovery in his backyard was not an accident. It was a message from the past, waiting for the right moment to be found. The ladder creaked softly as Mark climbed back into his backyard. Sunlight felt brighter than before, almost too bright after the quiet underground room. He stood still for a moment, breathing deeply, as if the air above ground carried a different weight now. Nina and Paul followed him up, carrying folders and sealed evidence bags. Ravi waited nearby, his arms crossed, watching Mark closely. The backyard looked the same, but it did not feel the same. What had once been an empty patch of grass was now a doorway into history. Nina explained the next steps calmly. The shelter would be registered as a historical structure. Copies of the documents would be stored by the local office. The original items could remain below, sealed and protected, as long as safety rules were followed. "You have options," Nina said. "You can cover it and leave it untouched. You can reinforce it and preserve it. Or you can redesign your plans around it." Mark nodded slowly. Every option sounded heavy. The pool plan sat folded on the patio table. Mark picked it up and stared at the blue drawings. The pool still looked nice on paper, clean and simple. But paper could not compete with what lay beneath the ground. That evening, after the officials left and the workers packed up for the day, Mark sat alone in his backyard. The slab was covered again, protected for the night. The hole was secured with boards. The sun dropped low, painting the sky with soft colors. Mark thought about the people in the photographs. Ordinary families. Ordinary fears. Extraordinary effort. They had built something together, trusting one another when the world felt uncertain. Mark realized something important. This place was not just under his yard. It was now part of his responsibility. Over the next few days, Mark spoke with neighbors. Some were surprised. Some were curious. A few remembered stories told by their grandparents about secret shelters and shared supplies. One older neighbor, Harris, came by and listened carefully. "My father once mentioned something like that," he said. "He said people worked together back then in ways we forgot." That stayed with Mark. He met again with Ravi to discuss construction options. Ravi was honest. "We can still build a pool," he said. "But it would mean removing or sealing the shelter. That is a big decision." Mark looked at the yard, imagining laughter, water, and summer days. Then he imagined visitors standing quietly, learning about the shelter. "I do not want to erase it," Mark said. Ravi nodded. "Then we build around it." That decision changed everything. The pool design was revised. The shelter would remain untouched, safely sealed beneath a section of the yard that would become a small garden instead of a pool edge. The slab would be reinforced and hidden under a stone pathway, clearly marked but protected. Mark worked closely with Nina and local planners. They approved the idea. A small plaque would be placed near the garden, explaining the shelter's history in simple words. Not as a warning, as a reminder. Construction resumed weeks later. This time, every movement felt careful and respectful. The workers treated the ground differently now. They knew what rested below. Mark watched every step, not with excitement, but with pride. The garden took shape slowly. Stones were placed carefully. Plants were chosen that required shallow roots, so nothing would disturb the shelter. A bench was added nearby, facing the garden. The pool still came to life on the other side of the yard, smaller than planned, but enough. One afternoon, as Mark sat on the bench, a family walking by stopped to ask about the plaque. Mark stood and explained the shelter and the people who built it. The parents listened closely. The children asked questions. "Why did they hide it?" one child asked. Mark smiled gently. "Because they wanted to protect each other." The child nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense. Word spread. Teachers asked permission to bring students. Local writers asked to include the story in small history books. Mark agreed, as long as the place was treated with care. The shelter remained closed, safe, and silent. It did not need to be opened again. One evening, Mark found himself alone again in the backyard. The pool water reflected the sky. The garden stones were warm under his hand. He thought about how close he came to never knowing. One more foot to the side, one different plan, and the shelter might have stayed buried forever. Mark felt grateful. Not for the delay. Not for the trouble. But for the chance to choose. The house had given him more than comfort. It had given him a connection to people who believed in preparing together and standing together. As the stars appeared, Mark understood that the discovery had not taken something away from him. It had given his home a deeper meaning. And there was still one final piece of the story waiting. Not underground, but within the way Mark chose to carry it forward. Months passed, and the house settled into a new rhythm. The pool was finished, smaller than first planned, but clear and calm. The garden above the shelter grew slowly, stone by stone, leaf by leaf. Nothing about the yard felt rushed anymore. Mark noticed that his days felt different too. He spent more time outside. Sometimes he sat on the bench near the garden, watching the light move across the stones. Other times he talked with neighbors who stopped by, curious about the plaque and the story behind it. The shelter had changed the home, but it had also changed the people around it. One weekend, Nina returned with a small group from the local history office. They wanted to hold a quiet gathering to honor the people who built the shelter long ago. It was not a celebration. It was a moment of respect. Mark agreed. Chairs were set up along the fence line. The garden was left untouched. The shelter stayed sealed below, just as it should be. Neighbors arrived slowly. Some brought their children. Some brought old photos and family stories. Harris came early and stood beside Mark. "I never thought I would see something like this," Harris said. "People remembering together." Mark nodded. "Neither did I." Nina spoke first. Her voice was calm and clear. She explained the shelter in simple words, how it was built by ordinary people during uncertain times. She spoke about cooperation, trust, and quiet strength. Then Mark was asked to speak. He did not prepare a long speech. He simply told the truth. "I wanted a pool," Mark said. "That is all I planned for. But the ground gave me something else." People listened closely. "This place reminds us that safety is not just walls or doors," Mark continued. "It is people choosing to care for each other." There was silence after that, the good kind that feels full. Later, children placed small stones around the garden path. Each stone had a name written on it, copied from the old records found below. It was a simple act, but it meant something. The shelter remained hidden, but the memory of it now lived above ground. As seasons changed, the story became part of the neighborhood. New families moved in and learned about it. Older residents shared stories they had once forgotten. Teachers used it as a lesson about preparation and unity. Mark kept the house, but it no longer felt like just his. It felt shared. One quiet evening, Mark went down the ladder one last time with permission from the office. He did not open boxes or move anything. He simply stood in the underground room with a flashlight. The air was still. The shelves were unchanged. The place felt peaceful. Mark turned off the light and stood in the dark for a moment. He imagined the voices that once filled the room. He imagined the hope that lived here when the world above felt uncertain. Then he climbed back up. The slab was sealed again, secure and strong. Life moved forward. Years later, Mark still lived in the house. The pool saw laughter and calm days. The garden saw quiet reflection. The plaque faded slightly from sun and rain, but the words remained clear. Visitors still came from time to time. Mark always welcomed them. He learned something important through all of it. The ground does not only hold what we bury. Sometimes, it holds what we are meant to remember. Mark never regretted the day the workers began digging. That moment had revealed more than concrete and stone. It had revealed a truth about people, about fear, and about kindness. The backyard was no longer just a place of comfort. It was a place of meaning. And every time Mark sat on the bench and felt the solid ground beneath his feet, he knew the shock of discovery had become something better. It had become a gift.